Okay, we are very pleased to have Dominic with us today presenting his work. This is part of a program, a research program that has to do with presentations around critical mobilities. And it's organized by the Mobilities area in the Bauman Institute. Dominic is professor in the Department of Urban and Tourism Studies at the University of Québec in Montréal. Honors in 2020, he chaired the Critical Tourism Studies North American Conference. He's editor-in-chief of an interesting open access journal, Theoros, which is a multidisciplinary journal that involves publications in tourism. And his current research is in the production of tourism space and its role in the expansion of the capitalist system from a biopolitical perspective. So today he will expand on precisely these ideas in his presentation. And the title of his talk is Territories, Biopolitics and Tourism, Moving Subjectivities in Place. So on to you, Dominic.
Thank you very much, Rodenti. Well, it's an honor and a privilege for me to speak today. I would like, before my talk, to acknowledge my great respect and little discomfort to be a man speaking on World Women Day, but I know we had like a schedule, and I kind of fill in for someone who could not present today. But then a happy World Women Day for all of you there. Just let me share my screen. Host visible participant. Oh, you'll have to enable me for screen sharing, Rodenti. But before I can share my screen, I would situate the. So just let me see if it worked. Not yet.
Did I manage? Did I enable you?
Yeah, but then I'll give a little bit of context to the presentation of today. Is today what I'll present is mostly a theoretical reflection that I'm conducting these days, and it's rooted in two papers that were published in the past and two that are in reviewing right now. So one was co-written with Myra Coulter, who's here, on the idea on tourism and biopolitics. The other one is in Mathis Stock's last book, called Progress in French Tourism Geography, where I actually tackled I would say the differences between territoire in French and in the French geography, and territory in the I would say the English-speaking tradition of geography, and with two new papers that are actually in reviewing. One on for the handbook of community tourism development, if my memory is good, and that's the title, on the regional development and place as a tourism development resource, and the other one on the idea of territory and with Deleuze work, Deleuze and Guattari works in theory look at tourism geography. So I'll start, even if I can't share my screen yet, because at the beginning it's mostly talking. I'm interested in tourism. Actually, I'm trained in regional development and planning, and tourism for me came through kind of an accidental research subject when and how they transform and they influence the development of small rural communities that are set at the boundaries of protected areas. And I ended up studying tourism because tourism was a lot of the time the only development strategy left for them once you're having the protected areas set. So and since then, I'm always kind of amazed about what actually how tourism is brought in the development discussion and in, I would say, the everyday life discourses. And on the other side, what actually the phenomenon complexity in the complexity of this phenomenon is creating. We've been repeating a lot, but I think it's important to kind of set the stage that before the pandemic, tourism was coined as the largest industry in the world, which is, they were saying that it's one job out of 10 that was like somewhat tourism related. But there's a long tradition of criticisms about tourism development, right from the 60s and in the 70s, we would start to have like critiques of tourism development. And today we even have like people calling for an end to tourism, but it's still highly boosted as a growth and development strategy. Really, like in the now, as I would say, the amount of tourism recovery strategies that countries, states, provinces, region, cities have set up, to go beyond to resist the COVID impact on tourism is quite indicative of this. I have a student's research auxiliary who actually do some kind of a was looking at the evolutions of those of those policies and strategies, and there's so many, it's really hard to follow the path. But then, what is tourism? I know all of you who are part of the tourism scholarship, we've been asking and talking about what is tourism, and beyond the job, the expenses and the night stay, which are, the triumvirate of tourism development indicator, how it is embedded in contemporary capitalism, but also in subjectivity formation, how tourism become part of what we are and how we define ourselves in our access to it or in our non-access to it. So, and for that, I would go back to Ellen Mexenwoods in her 2002 books, The Origin of Capitalism, to think about tourism and capitalism, but going to very simple question, and I would quote in her own word Dr. Wood in her definition of what capitalism is. She said capitalism is a system in which goods and services, down to the most basic necessities of life, are produced for profitable exchange, where even human labor power is a commodity for sale in the market, and when all economic actors are dependent on the market. This is true not only of workers who must sell their labor power for a wage, but also of capitalists who depend on the market to buy their input, including labor power, and to sell their output for profit. It seems pretty simple definition of what capitalism. And when we look at tourism, indeed, we see, tourism is definitely an aggregate of goods and services that are produced and sell in the market. But is tourism only that? And I think that's an important question, because when we travel, what do we buy? Do we buy only night stays and foods and, you know, souvenir, or we buy something else? Or through those souvenir, night stay and meals, we get access to something else. So in a market, and when we look at the economic of measuring tourism, we see something that, well, first of all, tourism will end up being aggregated and resumed to food, lodging, you know, car rentals, and that kind of like tourism transaction. But then a market transaction become a tourism industry transaction when it's consumed by tourists, and creating some kind of a snake biting its own tail definition. You need tourists to have a tourism transaction, and you have tourism offer to get tourists. And you know, most of my work is about like smaller community, rural community, peripheral communities. And one example in the small community where I live, because I live in a rural area, you know, we have you know, I would say a grocery, a small grocery for the community. And in the winter, this small grocery is actually no tourism transaction. You know, it's people who live there who actually stop by and buy their, you know, their primary good necessities. But then in the summer, there's two, you know, campgrounds where you have like RVs and tents and people coming for some, you know, summer stay around. And then all of a sudden, that same business, that same building, that same particular place become into tourism, a touristic business. But then it's still the same, I would say the same, the same business, except maybe, you know, the hamburger bread bun become twice as much expensive because people in camping like to make barbecue with hamburgers, and they come back during the winter to the regular price for local. So we kind of see that kind of a dissociation with the local economics, local market, and local, I would say, price elasticity with the one of tourists. So tourism reframing the market. And that's where I would like to explore with you today with that territory and biopolitics, is that what tourism brings in the market in the end is not hamburger buns, it's not a campsite, it's not, you know, a hotel room. It is, but it's mostly le territoire, the territory, the place, as a good. That's the good we buy. You know, consuming space. And that's, I know it's not a new idea, but I think we need to keep pushing that idea that it's consuming space and consuming territories. And on the other side, we have the experience. That's, you know, the emotion, the effect in a mobile context that can be equated to some kind of a service. So when next we'll talk about goods and services that are brought in the market through for profit in capitalism. In tourism, we have actual goods and actual services, but to consume, I would say indirectly, a good that is place and a service that is the experience. And this is what I'd like to explore with you today. So, So that brings me to the idea of territoire, territory, and territory and territoire in French have the same Latin roots. You know, we can hear that, which is terra, that mean land. You know, quite basic, territoire, a piece of land, and territorium, which is the land under the control of a city, a judge, a governor, etc. So you have that idea of the materiality, the land, but also of the power. And it's a central concept used as a way to divide the world, but also to politically control it, as was saying Eldon in 2013, and that it's based on the assumption of a stable and non-ambiguous spatial form to situate the political action of the state. So territory is traditionally in, I would say the English language geography, more related to the political action of the state, of the borders, it's a really Westphalian, I would say, construction of it. But then you have like a book that I think that was really influential here in North America with the idea of territory from Friedman and Weaver in 1979 that was called Territories and Function, where they were actually looking at the geographical division of labor through that idea of the function. So a geographical division of labor based as in terms of functions and comparative advantages in the global capitalism production system, even if in 1979 that was not, that idea of the global capitalism production system didn't have the expansion that we have experienced in our days, and they were going, making a position against functions with territories, which was actually, a living in place, communities living in place within the resources that are available to, satisfy mostly their basic needs, instead of specializing into a functions of a global production chain and being in the capitalism exchange for everything else. So that was an interesting book at the time, because it brings the idea of territoire in the English, I would say, sphere in a closer way to the way the French geographer work about with the notion of territory. So in French geography, territoire is closer to place. It's more relational and less structural than territory. But because it's anchored in a particular way of living in place, but that is also translated politically and socially. There is that idea of, in the French geography, of projet de territoire, territories project, that is a negotiation of living in place, but also that is politically built in interaction with the states, but not necessarily through the states, but also through different scales. And that was also used a lot with the in the economic geography of innovation in the 80s, especially in France and Switzerland, around the Grémy, about the European innovative milieu, like they were saying. And that's idea that, territoire is about, organizing proximity, is organizing proximities around a way to live in place, but also in negotiating with different scales and states. So what happened when we bring tourism and territories together? So we have some kind of a contradiction in the expression, because tourism is mobility, while territory is more about a relatively stable, fixed city in space. But territories, in the French sense, it's a political project, while tourists are more a fluid, non-political inscription in place, like Eken Tesfahouni was publishing in 2016. So tourism territories, then the territoriality of the tourists' practices, which mean, recoding the life in place along the fulfillment of tourism demands, building a regionality around the potential accumulation of capital from tourism. But this recoding work along a continuum where it can accentuate alterity, but also reduce alterity. And this process is biopolitical in the sense that it's about ruling and governing, populations, moving populations, stable populations. And that brings us to the experience, and I call that, that section experience for sales, because experience, then it's at the core of the product. So then the experience is at the core of the tourism territories. And so tourism, in bringing experience in the market, kind of hierarchize experience. And through that, hierarchize culture and people and place and subjectivity. And this experiences become something that can be accumulated through the body and also through technological apparatus. Photography is one example, and you can pair it with the social media, and then you have like that Instagram photographic accumulation of experience in place. And it's exposing tourism as a subjectivity formation apparatus, where tourism is part of what builds the subject, but then that mobile subject that is the tourist is also, I would say, post-political in its non-inscription. And there, I would like, go towards Richard Eck works when Richard and Mekin Tesfahouni with the paradigmatic tourist and tourism, because all of a sudden it's post-politic, it's in the tourist subjectivity being not inscribed in place, but that creation of those whole apparatus of subjectivity formation is political in its post-political process. And so the biopolitics of experience come from the idea that biopolitics, it's regulate life from the interior through the internalized process of control, internalized process of control that include language, once again, subjectivity, affect, desires. And on one side, you have the biopolitics of the camp with the works of Agamben, with the space of exception in tourism, where to consume experience, when we can think of all the work on the resort and the work of Claudio Minca on his paper called The Island, where you have a high alterity with the outside, but a low alterity inside, where we get together. And if we think of this, of this idea of the biopolitic of the camp as a space of exception to consume experience, as something, that comes with the all included and those enclave tourism, commercial enclave tourism that we know, but also at the beginning of the social tourism, when we're having mass of people from working class moving to, and in France, it's quite, the phenomenon have been studied by historians of tourism, where they were moving to the sea, and we're having that area where they were producing in a different place the same kind of sociability that they were having in the city. So we can also look at those historical phenomena through the lens of the camp. And on the other side, you have the touristification of daily life, where actually tourism get interwoven with everything that people do on their regular basic daily lives, that bring the mundane experience in the market, live like the local, even if the local might have a boring life, and but also that bring non-tourism subject as part of the ambience of the tourism experience. UQAM is right in, or campus is right in the Quartier des Spectacles in Montreal. So, a day like today, where it's the spring start to get felt, and we have like the sun and everything, and people get on the plaza, all of a sudden, my daily life as a professor who go walk outside between two classes, get integrated part of the ambience of what is sold in terms of the experience, but also all kind of other people, and some subjectivity in place that maybe don't want to be part of that tourism ambience. So it's about disciplining the individual and regulating communities, like Rolofson and Minka stress in their paper on the superhosts of Airbnb. But that biopolitic of experience on sale for tourism is also creating a right to consume as tourists, and an obligation to host for communities, as Sabrina Tremblay-Huet exposed quite, I would say, efficiently in her thesis. It's a law thesis on the international rights of tourism, which is consumption rights, and on the other side, communities are in an obligation to host, and those kind of population control are definitely biopolitical process that are institutionalized through law and rights and international charters of right. So it creates a blurred geographical alterity with some where mobile and immobile become, I would say, one of the main marker of alterity within those touristified daily life place. And this brings us to, and that's where I turns towards Deleuze and Guattari. And today I will stop to that territorialization, deterritorialization process. As those of you who are who spend some time with those two thinkers know it's quite generative, quite chaotic even to read and to travel through, and every binary that you open another binary, and all of a sudden you have that huge rhizomatic apparatus in front of you. So I know it's kind of not, it's a shortcoming to just look at territorialization, deterritorialization. But then Rodenti asked me to talk 30 to 45 minutes and not 2 hours, so I'll get to that. What I've been looking through the territory, and then the place as one part of the good that has been consumed, and as the experience of some kind of the service and their biopolitical relationship, for me, quite get an echo in that territorialization, deterritorialization process of Deleuze and Guattari, because I can see tourism as a tension between matters and expressivity, between fixity and movement, where all of a sudden, when you if we look at the exclusive space of tourism, with the figure of the camp, then you have a you deterritorialize some space, to create that enclavic tourism, and re-territorialize through that micro geography within the camp, and the biopolitic of tourism is weaving place and experience in this process, where territorializing around inner properties of tourism when we get exclusive, but also deterritorializing it from its surrounding. I just need to so, and I was having some pictures that I wanted to show to illustrate this. Let me try to find it again. Can I share my screen now? Okay.
You should be able to.
Yeah, I'm not. Participant. I think you'll have to make me co-host. I think that's the only way. But then I can, the picture are not central, but it kind of give a materiality to it. Just finish with the territorialization, deterritorialization. Well, those two concepts are in movements towards each other. territorializing and deterritorializing from the territory, the terra, from the terra to the territory. They are folding, unfolding with movement, practices, continuities, and rupture. On one side, you know, they can be transcendental and immanent movement, where transcendental ideals and idea can deterritorialize, you know, like principle of free movement, opening frontier. But deterritorialization can also be immanent, some freeing from the terra the individual, the self, who's sent in movement, becoming the other, and reterritorializing with new practices. And this reterritorializing movement set new boundaries on the whole, operates through inner properties of deterritorialized movement. And I was wanting to show
Can we try now?
Oh yeah, it worked now. Great.
Oh dear me.
That's okay. It happens. Sure. Okay. Do you see it?
Yeah.
Yeah, you see the picture, so I'll bring it full screen. Okay, so here's an illustration through l'ensemble de la Grave in the Magdalene Island Archipelago, which is a smaller archipelago in the St. Lawrence Gulf, north of the northwest of the Maritimes provinces in Canada. And you know, that archipelago have like 12,000 year-round citizens, but they have during the summertime there's like 70,000 people who actually go there in holidays and vacation. And then where I show you, it's a heritage ensemble called La Grave, which is end of 19th century, beginning of 20th century, proto-industrial fishing areas, where actually those buildings were semi-permanent buildings that were there to, you know, to process fish and dry fish and you know, package fish and send fish around the area as a commodity. So it was really territorialized through, to matters like physical matters, with the fact that you have a lagoon on the right where the boat can be protected from the storms, and you have that small, the water goes through this small thong of I would say of gravels between two islands, and so in that time, that was an important, I would say, quality of the place, because it could, and in the fall and in the spring, when you have the higher tide and the storms, you know, it kind of clean up itself from all the residue that the fish and that proto-industrial fish industry were leaving there. But it got deterritorialized when, you know, fishing become industrial, with the moving of the fishing harbor somewhere else in the archipelago, and those traditional practices becoming, you know, kind of some kind of folklore, folks' way of working with the fish, and it was turned into, you know, it's a really nice area, like you could see the picture, and it was turned into a tourist area, where actually those small houses are now you know, they are cafe and stores, and from what you could see, you know, it's the it's the classical type of tourist businesses that you can see on Main Street, on some heritage Main Street everywhere in North America, even if, you know, the look, and there's some nuance in terms of the local entrepreneur, but then, you know, you get jewelry, you get a craft-made soap, you get the coffee shop, you get the little bar, you get a small museum, and the souvenir shop, and a bread maker. So at the same time, you know, it kind of reterritorialize the expressivity of the place in terms of the role in the history, but it deterritorialized, you know, in becoming some kind of a much more generic shopping tourism experience. And right now we have another issue that goes there, where it's the climate change, you know, where all of a sudden those places, the fact that the water goes on top of it every other time, that was, considered equality at a time. And for that deterritorialized activity that is happening there through tourism, it's not positive right now that water get on top of it and more, because those buildings now are permanent. And so you have like a strong investment in the material of the territoire through a beach replenishment. And why I'm showing you this, and that, like you say, it's a major transformation. It's because discursively, they re-territorialize the area through tourism to mobilize resources from a larger scale, and so you have like a really situated historical practice that's been brought to tourism, and in tourism, became, mostly shells from quite, common tourism businesses in that place, but then they re-territorialize it at the level of the, of the province and of the country to actually say, because tourists in their territoriality, goes there, it's an heritage that goes beyond the local values of this place. And so you have like that whole negotiation of re-territorialization, deterritorialization, and then they re-territorialize it on a larger scale and this get, once again, potentially, because we don't know where it goes, being deterritorialized again if the actual replenishment is not working, or if the capital investment that is needed to actually lift those houses, those places. Most of those businesses are for sale right now if you want to buy one. And then it can, we don't know how that system will territorially evolve. So where I was going with that, and I would like to close with three, I could talk, all day about this, but I would close to 3 points about, territories, biopolitics, and tourism as the moving subjectivities in place. So my theoretical reflection, for me anyway, appears highly relevant to generate different understanding of tourism beyond dichotomies like local, global, mobile, immobile, rural, urban, mundane, spectacular, etc. But without leaving them behind. Because if we have those dichotomies, it's because there is something that's happening. And I think that's something that is one of the lessons that we can take from Deleuze and Guattari, is that they construct their thinking with a lot of dichotomies, but they kind of add to each other and they become much more complex. And then we have to think of how they are woven together in terms of a fabric that sustain the phenomenon, but how it's also, link and unweave to different system, system is not the right word, a different assemblage, I would say, to stay coherent. But then the deterritorializing process, I think we need to push more into that, because it's allowed to dissect how mobility contribute to both movement at different interconnected scales. Deterritorializing at the local scale for some stakeholders, while re-territorializing at higher scale, all this while creating and destroying alterity at both scale, making it more the same or making it highly different. So tourism within that seem as a biopolitical technology of the self, and therefore also a technology of others that contribute to subjectivity formation in contemporary mobile world. And when we look at the actual pandemic in mobilities, it didn't stop the subjectivity formation, but it's re-territorializing it through different practices while deterritorializing other practices issued mostly from the past. And I think that's where we need to actually inquire and question. And I'm not saying that the framework I just exposed today is is perfect. It's far from it. But then I think it had potential to actually, questions and inquired those transformations that has been happening. And as I would like to close, because I think that tourism is strongly, especially in the middle and higher class of the Western countries, within that subjectivity formation of how part of what can define the subject, either in its success or its non-access to it. And as we've seen, tourism was turned off for a couple of months, and people didn't abandon it. They rushed to it in different practices, in different space, in different time. But then it was still, and there was the whole, I have a presentation at 5 in the morning, at 9, 8 in the evening in Japan tomorrow, where actually I will look at those issues. But we didn't discard tourism as a subjectivity formation practices. We just transform it through the pandemic. And now that the post-COVID become the with COVID, I think we really need to go deeper on those process of territoriality and the biopolitics of it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dominic. You did manage to stick more or less to the allocated time from you.